The champagne flute felt too delicate in my hand, like it might shatter if I squeezed even slightly. Around me, Manhattan's elite circulated through the Grand Rothwell's ballroom in their designer gowns and tailored tuxedos, all gathered for the annual Children's Foundation benefit auction. I didn't belong here among the old money and corporate titans, but my press credentials had gotten me through the door, and my curiosity had kept me from leaving the moment I spotted him. Tiago Montero stood across the room near the floor-to-ceiling windows, a silhouette against the city lights that stretched beyond. Even from this distance, I could catalog the details I'd memorized from surveillance photos during 3 months of investigation. 6'2", broad shoulders beneath a perfectly tailored black suit, dark hair styled with just enough deliberate disorder to look effortless. But it was his presence that commanded attention. The way conversations dimmed slightly when he moved through the crowd, how people's body language shifted when he approached. I was supposed to be writing an exposé on his organization, on the Montero family's decades-long grip on the city's underground economy. My editor at the Metropolitan Post had given me 6 months to gather enough evidence for a feature that would make my career. 3 months in, I had boxes of research, countless surveillance photos, testimony from former associates willing to talk off the record, but nothing concrete enough to publish. Nothing that explained why a man allegedly running one of the city's most powerful criminal enterprises also donated millions to children's charities and had never been successfully prosecuted for anything more serious than a parking ticket. "You're staring," a voice said beside me. I turned to find Gabriela Montero, Tiago's younger sister, holding a champagne flute identical to mine. She wore an emerald dress that probably cost more than my rent, but her smile was warm rather than calculating. "Guilty," I admitted, deciding honesty was safer than a clumsy lie. "Your brother is difficult to ignore." "Most people find him terrifying," Gabriela said, her dark eyes assessing me with intelligence that reminded me she ran the family's legitimate real estate holdings. "You don't seem terrified." "Should I be?" "That depends entirely on your intentions." She sipped her champagne. "Serafina Blake, investigative journalist for the Metropolitan Post. You've been asking questions about my family for 3 months. Did you think we wouldn't notice?" My pulse jumped, but I kept my voice steady. "I'm thorough in my research." "You're reckless," she corrected, not unkindly. "Most journalists who dig into our affairs receive polite warnings to pursue other stories. You received 3 such warnings and ignored them all. Either you're incredibly brave or incredibly foolish." "Maybe both," I said. "Your brother's empire fascinates me. A man who allegedly controls half the city's underground economy but has never shed blood to maintain power. Who resolves conflicts through negotiation rather than violence. Who's built something that shouldn't theoretically exist in his world. And you think writing about it will do what exactly? Make you famous? Expose corruption?" Gabriela's expression remained neutral. "Or maybe you're just curious about whether the man matches the myth." Before I could respond, she gestured toward her brother. "Why don't you ask him yourself? He's noticed you watching. Has been for the last 20 minutes, actually. He's curious about what makes a journalist brave enough to ignore 3 warnings." She walked away, leaving me alone with my racing heart, and the weight of Tiago's attention suddenly fixed directly on me. Across the room, his gray eyes met mine, and something electric passed through the space between us. Not fear, though perhaps I should have felt that. Something more dangerous. Recognition, maybe. Challenge. I watched him excuse himself from his conversation and begin moving through the crowd toward me, each step deliberate and unhurried. People shifted to let him pass, conversations pausing briefly in his wake. I had approximately 30 seconds to decide my approach, to determine whether I was about to make the best or worst decision of my career. He stopped 3 feet away, close enough for conversation but maintaining the veneer of propriety. Up close, the surveillance photos hadn't done him justice. His features were sharp, almost severe, softened only by the faint lines around his eyes that suggested he smiled more than his reputation implied. The scent of his cologne reached me, something woody and expensive that probably cost more than my monthly salary. "Miss Blake," he said, his voice carrying a faint accent that spoke of private schools and European educations. "I've heard you've been asking questions about me." "Your sister mentioned that," I said, proud that my voice didn't shake. "She seemed to think I was being reckless. Gabriella worries." His mouth curved slightly. "Are you being reckless?" "That depends on your definition. I prefer to think of it as thorough journalism. Thorough journalism that involves photographing my business meetings from across streets, following my associates, requesting interviews with people who have no reason to speak kindly of my family." He'd been tracking my investigation. The realization should have alarmed me. Instead, it sparked something competitive in my chest. "If you wanted to stop me, you could have. 3 warnings, as your sister mentioned. You could have made the 4th one more convincing." "I could have," he agreed. "But I was curious about what someone as persistent as you might uncover. What conclusions you'd draw from your research." This was my opening, the moment I'd been preparing for. I straightened my spine and met his gaze directly. "I think you're not what you appear to be. I think the criminal empire everyone whispers about is either vastly exaggerated or operates so differently from traditional organized crime that the usual frameworks don't apply. I think you've built something unique, and I want to understand it. And then write about it, expose it, potentially destroy it." His tone remained conversational, but something sharp flickered in his eyes. "Or tell the truth," I countered. "Whatever that truth actually is. Isn't that what journalism is supposed to do?" We stood there in the middle of the ballroom, the auction proceeding around us, people pretending not to watch our exchange while clearly fascinated by it. Tiago studied me for a long moment, and I forced myself not to look away, to meet his assessment with my own. "You asked what I would do for you," he said finally, his voice dropping lower. "To stop you from publishing whatever story you've constructed in your mind." "I did ask that question," I confirmed, though I hadn't realized I'd spoken it aloud. "What's your answer?" Instead of responding, he reached into his jacket pocket and withdrew a folded piece of paper. "Come with me." It wasn't a request, not really, but it also wasn't a command. An invitation to step off the edge of something safe into territory I didn't fully understand. I should have refused, should have maintained professional distance, should have recognized this for the manipulation it probably was. I followed him. He led me through the ballroom toward a side corridor, away from the crowd and auction. We turned a corner into an alcove that overlooked the city through another set of windows, the space dim and intimate. When he turned to face me, we were close enough that I could see the exact gray of his eyes, like storm clouds breaking. "What I would do," he said, unfolding the paper, "is show you this." He handed it to me. In the low light, I had to angle it toward the window to read. It was a list of names, typed in neat rows. 14 names total. Each one had a single line struck through it, the kind of mark you'd make when completing a task. My breath caught as I recognized several names. Roberto Santini, a former business partner who'd publicly accused Tiago of fraud before disappearing from the city. Marcus Delgado, a rival who'd attempted a hostile takeover of several Montero properties. Elena Voss, a city council member who'd launched an investigation into the family's holdings. "These are people who opposed you," I said slowly. "People who tried to destroy your organization." "Yes." His fingers brushed mine as he pointed to the first name. "Roberto Santini. I helped him relocate to Portland with enough capital to start fresh. He runs a successful import business now. Completely legitimate. We speak occasionally." He moved to the second name, his touch lingering against my hand. "Marcus Delgado. We negotiated a settlement that gave him controlling interest in 2 properties I'd acquired. He's expanded into commercial real estate. Doing quite well." My heart was racing now, not from fear, but from the proximity, the way his voice rumbled low and intimate in this darkened space, the heat of his fingers against mine. Elena Voss, he continued. Her investigation found irregularities in city zoning, not in my holdings. I provided evidence that helped her prosecute actual corruption. She's now considering a run for mayor, and I've committed to supporting her campaign. I stared at the list, my journalist's brain trying to process what he was showing me. You didn't destroy them. You helped them. I resolved the conflicts, he corrected. Destroying people creates enemies. Helping them creates allies, or at least removes threats without violence. This shouldn't work, I heard myself say. In your world, this approach shouldn't work. It's too soft, too forgiving. Perhaps my world isn't what you think it is. He took the paper back, refolding it carefully. You asked what I would do to stop you from publishing. The answer is nothing. I'm giving you the truth instead. What you do with it is your choice. The challenge in his voice was unmistakable. He was daring me to write the real story, confident that the truth was more complex than any exposé I'd planned. Why? The question escaped before I could stop it. Why show me this? Why not just threaten me, or buy my silence, or any of the 100 other things someone in your position could do? His hand came up, and I felt his fingertips brush my cheek with devastating gentleness. Because you're right. I'm not what I appear to be, and I'm tired of pretending otherwise. Because your curiosity is refreshing, after years of people either fearing me or trying to use me. And because the moment you walked into this ballroom tonight, staring at me like I was a puzzle worth solving, rather than a threat to avoid, I decided I wanted you to know the truth. The admission hung between us, weighted with implications I wasn't ready to examine. My skin tingled where he'd touched me, and I was hyper-aware of how close we were standing, how easy it would be to close the remaining distance. This is insane, I whispered. I came here to investigate you, to expose whatever criminal empire you're running. And now? His voice was barely above a murmur. Now I have more questions than I started with. I forced myself to step back, to put physical distance between us before I did something monumentally stupid like kiss a man I was supposed to be investigating. Your list, your approach, none of it makes sense with what I thought I knew. Then maybe you should learn more before you write your story. He pulled a card from his pocket, pressing it into my palm. My private number. Call me when you're ready to hear the whole truth, instead of the version you've constructed from surveillance and speculation. I looked down at the card, expensive cardstock with minimal information. Just his name and a phone number. No title, no company, no pretense. 3 months? I heard myself say. Give me 3 months of access. Real access, not staged meetings or carefully curated information. I want to see how your organization actually operates. I want to interview your people, review your legitimate holdings, understand the full scope of what you've built. His eyebrow rose. In exchange for what? In exchange for writing the real story instead of the sensationalized exposé my editor is expecting. The truth, whatever that truth actually is, even if it's complicated. Complicated, he repeated, something like amusement flickering across his features. That's certainly one word for it. Do we have a deal? He studied me for another long moment, and I could see him weighing the risks, calculating the angles. Then he extended his hand. 3 months, full access. But understand, Miss Blake, that what you're asking for means seeing parts of my world that most people never witness. Some of those truths might be uncomfortable. I shook his hand, feeling the warmth and strength of his grip. I'm a journalist. Uncomfortable truths are kind of my specialty. We'll see. He didn't release my hand immediately. his thumb brushing across my knuckles in a gesture that felt far too intimate for a business arrangement. "Shall we start Monday? I have a meeting that might interest you." "What kind of meeting?" "The kind where I resolve a conflict without violence." His smile was slight, but genuine. "Consider it your first real glimpse into how my world actually operates." He left me standing in that alcove, my hand still tingling from his touch, my mind racing with possibilities and warnings in equal measure. I'd just agreed to spend 3 months embedded in Tiago Montero's organization, to gain access to a world that had destroyed other journalists who'd tried to expose it. I should have been terrified. Instead, I felt alive in a way I hadn't in years, curiosity and something more dangerous combining into determination. I looked down at his card, at the private number that represented both opportunity and risk. Monday couldn't come fast enough. Monday morning found me standing outside a building in the financial district, checking the address Tiago had texted me at 7 a.m. The message had been characteristically brief. Meridian Tower, 42nd floor, 9 a.m., dress professionally. You'll be observing a negotiation. I'd chosen a charcoal gray suit that looked expensive enough to fit in with whatever crowd I'd be joining, paired with heels that added 3 inches to my 5'6" frame. My recorder sat in my purse, along with 2 backup pens and a notebook, old habits from journalism school that I'd never abandoned. The elevator ride to the 42nd floor felt endless. My reflection in the polished doors showed a woman who looked far more confident than she felt. 3 months of access had sounded reasonable Saturday night in that dimly lit alcove. Now, in the harsh morning light, it felt like I'd agreed to walk into a lion's den, armed only with curiosity and a recorder. The elevator doors opened to reveal a reception area that screamed understated wealth. Marble floors, modern art that probably cost more than my car, floor-to-ceiling windows offering views of the city below. A receptionist looked up from her computer, her smile professional, but genuinely warm. "Miss Blake? Mr. Montero is expecting you. Conference room 3, straight down the hall and to your right." I followed her directions, my heels clicking on the marble, my pulse steady despite my nerves. The conference room door was open, revealing Tiago standing by the windows in a navy suit that fit him like it had been made specifically for his frame. Which it probably had been. He turned when I entered, and something in his expression shifted from business-focused to something warmer. "Serafina, punctual, I appreciate that." The use of my first name felt intimate after months of being Miss Blake in all my research. "You said 9. I'm here at 8:57. Early is on time is late." He gestured to a chair at the conference table. "We have a few minutes before the others arrive. Let me explain what you're about to witness." I sat, pulling out my notebook and recorder. "May I?" He glanced at the recorder, then nodded. "Everything you see and hear today is on the record. That's the agreement." I pressed record, the small red light blinking to life. "Explain away. 2 families in this city have been in conflict for 18 months over territory in the garment district. The Castellanos control most of the import warehouses. The Petrovs have been attempting to expand their distribution network into the same area. The traditional resolution would involve violence, intimidation, a gradual escalation until one family either retreats or is destroyed." His tone was matter-of-fact, like he was discussing weather patterns rather than gang warfare. I scribbled notes, my shorthand keeping pace with his words. "Instead," he continued, "I've invited both families here to propose an alternative. The Castellanos get exclusive rights to import operations. The Petrovs get first option on distribution contracts for everything the Castellanos bring in. They become partners rather than competitors. Both profit more than they would fighting over scraps, and nobody gets hurt." "And they'll just agree to this? Just like that?" "No." A slight smile touched his mouth. "There will be posturing, threats, demands for concessions. Marco Castellano will insist his family's claim is superior. Viktor Petrov will argue that his distribution network is too valuable to be reduced to a subordinate role. They'll both look to me to take sides, to favor one over the other. And will you? I'll favor the solution that prevents bloodshed and maximizes profit for everyone involved, including my own interests. These families pay me a percentage for access to certain city resources. If they're both prospering, my percentage increases. If they're at war, everyone loses except the funeral homes and lawyers. The casual mention of his own profit motive should have been damning. Instead, it felt refreshingly honest. He wasn't pretending to be a benevolent mediator. He was a businessman protecting his investments by preventing his clients from destroying each other. Voices in the hallway announced the arrival of the Castellanos. 3 men entered, all wearing expensive suits that couldn't quite hide the hardness underneath. The oldest, whom I assumed was Marco, had silver hair and the bearing of someone accustomed to respect bordering on fear. His eyes swept the room, pausing briefly on me before fixing on Tiago. "You didn't mention there would be press," Marco said, his accent thick with old-world Italian. "Miss Blake is here as my guest," Tiago replied smoothly. "She's writing about how modern business resolves conflicts. Consider it free positive publicity for your cooperation." Marco's expression suggested he found nothing positive about my presence, but he took a seat without further protest. His 2 companions flanked him, silent and watchful. The Petrovs arrived 3 minutes later. Viktor was younger than Marco, maybe 45, with the kind of lean build that suggested he'd been dangerous in his youth and had simply refined the skill over time. He spotted me immediately, his pale blue eyes narrowing. "The journalist," he said, making it sound like an accusation. "The one who's been asking questions about Montero for months." "The same," I confirmed, meeting his gaze without flinching. "I'm here to observe, not participate. Observe her starting a war between our families, more like." Viktor took his seat across from the Castellanos, the battle lines literally drawn across the conference table. "Gentlemen," Tiago said, his voice cutting through the tension with the precision of a blade. "We're here because the current situation is unsustainable. You've both lost resources, money, and people to this conflict. It's time to find a better solution." What followed was 2 hours of the most intense negotiation I'd ever witnessed. Marco insisted his family's historical claim to the garment district gave them absolute authority. Viktor countered that history meant nothing without the infrastructure to capitalize on it, which only his distribution network provided. They argued over percentages, territories, respect, and dozens of details I struggled to track in my notes. Through it all, Tiago remained the calm center of the storm. He didn't raise his voice, never showed frustration, simply redirected each argument toward practical solutions. When Marco demanded 70% of profits, Tiago pointed out that would leave Viktor with too little incentive to maintain quality distribution. When Viktor insisted on equal partnership despite contributing less infrastructure, Tiago reminded him that the Castellanos had invested decades building their import operation. He was a conductor orchestrating a symphony from chaos, and watching him work was mesmerizing. By 11:30, they'd reached an agreement. 60-40 split favoring the Castellanos on import profits, 50-50 on distribution margins. The Petrovs would handle all logistics for Castellano imports, with guaranteed contracts for 2 years. Both families would pay Tiago 15% of their combined operations, an increase from the 12% they'd been paying separately. Everyone left the meeting having gained something, which meant everyone left satisfied enough not to restart the conflict. After the families departed, I sat in the now empty conference room, my hand cramping from 2 hours of continuous note-taking. Tiago returned with 2 cups of coffee, setting one before me without asking if I wanted it. "That was remarkable," I admitted, accepting the coffee gratefully. "You just prevented what could have been a gang war." "I prevented a costly conflict that would have damaged everyone's profits," he corrected, sitting beside me rather than across the table. Close enough that I could smell his cologne again, that woody scent that I'd been trying not to think about since Saturday. Altruism had nothing to do with it. But the result is the same. People who might have died won't. Businesses that might have been destroyed will prosper. However you frame your motivations, the outcome is positive. He studied me over his coffee cup. Most journalists would focus on the profit motive, the percentage I'm taking, the fact that I'm essentially taxing criminal enterprises. Are they criminal enterprises, though? Import and distribution are legitimate businesses. With profit margins that suggest they're not declaring all their inventory to customs, and distribution networks that occasionally handle goods that never appear on any official manifest. His honesty was startling. I don't ask too many questions about specifics, but I'm not naive about the nature of their operations. Yet you help them anyway. I help them avoid killing each other, which benefits everyone, including the legitimate parts of my organization that rely on stable business conditions. He set down his coffee. Does that distinction matter to your story? I considered the question seriously. I think it matters that you're honest about it, that you're not pretending to be something you're not. Unlike the narrative you'd constructed before Saturday? There was amusement in his voice, not accusation. My narrative assumed violence and intimidation, traditional organized crime. What I witnessed today was sophisticated conflict resolution that happened to involve families with questionable business practices. I closed my notebook. It's more complicated than I expected. Most things are once you look closely. He stood, offering his hand to help me up. The gesture was old-fashioned, almost courtly, and I found myself accepting it without thinking. His hand was warm, strong, his grip careful not to pull too hard. We stood there for a moment, hands linked, the conference room suddenly feeling smaller and more intimate than it had during the negotiation. Wednesday, he said, not releasing my hand. I have dinner with the CEO of Castellano Imports, the legitimate parent company. It's a social occasion, but you'll learn more about how the families operate. Join me. It took me a moment to process that he was asking me to dinner. As part of the 3 months of access? As part of understanding how my world works. His thumb brushed across my knuckles, the same gesture from Saturday night. Business in my circles is conducted over meals as often as in conference rooms. If you want the full picture, you need to see both. Is this appropriate? I asked, even as my pulse quickened at the continued contact. Dinner feels less like professional observation and more like a date? He smiled slightly. It's a business dinner that you're attending as my guest and observer. What it feels like is up to you. He released my hand, stepping back to restore professional distance. But the warmth of his touch lingered, and the look in his eyes suggested he knew exactly what effect he was having on me. Wednesday at 7, I heard myself agree. Where should I meet you? I'll send a car for you. The restaurant is in Little Italy, Castellano family territory. It's better if you arrive with me. After he walked me to the elevator, after I descended 42 floors and emerged into the bright afternoon sunlight, I stood on the sidewalk trying to process what had just happened. I'd witnessed a negotiation that prevented violence. I'd seen Tiago operate with intelligence and strategy rather than intimidation. And I'd agreed to what might or might not be a date with the man I was supposed to be investigating. My phone buzzed with a text from my editor. Any progress on the Montero story? Need something publishable soon. I stared at the message, thinking about the list of crossed-out names, the morning's negotiation, the way Tiago's hand had felt against mine. What I had wasn't what my editor expected. It was better and more complicated, and absolutely nothing I could publish yet. Making progress, I typed back. Need more time to verify sources. It was technically true. I was making progress, just not toward the exposé everyone expected. I was discovering a story far more nuanced than criminal empire versus law enforcement. A story about a man who'd found a way to profit from peace rather than violence, who saw resolution as more lucrative than conflict. A story I was dangerously close to becoming part of rather than simply reporting. The car Tiago sent Wednesday evening was understated elegance, a black sedan with leather seats and a driver who opened my door without comment. I'd chosen a deep blue dress that walked the line between professional and evening wear, paired with heels and minimal jewelry. Armor for whatever this dinner actually was. We drove through the city as twilight fell, the buildings lighting up against the darkening sky. My stomach fluttered with nerves I refused to examine too closely. This was research, observation, professional investigation. The fact that my pulse jumped when I thought about seeing Tiago again was irrelevant. The restaurant was tucked into a side street in Little Italy, the kind of place with no sign, just a door that opened into warmth and the scent of garlic and wine. Tiago waited inside, leaning against the host stand with casual grace. He wore charcoal slacks and a white shirt with the sleeves rolled to his elbows, the first time I'd seen him in anything less than a full suit. The sight did something dangerous to my composure. Serafina. His smile was genuine as he straightened. You look beautiful. Thank you. I accepted the compliment with more grace than I felt. This is quite a place. It's been in the Castellano family for 3 generations. Marco's grandfather opened it when he first came from Sicily. The food is exceptional, and the company tonight should be interesting. He guided me through the dining room with his hand at the small of my back, the touch light but unmistakable. Heads turned as we passed, recognition and respect in the glances directed at Tiago. We were led to a private room in the back where Marco Castellano waited with a woman I assumed was his wife and a younger man who had Marco's features softened by youth. Tiago. Marco stood to greet us, his expression considerably warmer than it had been Monday. And Miss Blake. I didn't expect to see the journalist again so soon. Miss Blake is helping me document how modern business operates, Tiago said smoothly. I thought she should see the social side, as well as the negotiations. Marco's wife, introduced as Isabella, was gracious and welcoming in a way that suggested genuine warmth rather than politeness. Their son, Leonardo, was 23 and studying business at Columbia. He looked at me with open curiosity. You're writing about my father's meeting with Tiago? Leonardo asked as we settled into our seats. I'm writing about how conflicts get resolved without violence, I clarified. Your father and Mr. Petrov's negotiation was an example of that process. You make it sound civilized, Marco said, accepting a glass of wine from the server. But don't romanticize it, Miss Blake. The reason we negotiate is because Tiago has made violence unprofitable. He's created a system where cooperation pays better than conflict. Is that a criticism? I asked. It's an observation. Marco's smile was slight. 20 years ago, my father would have handled the Petrov situation very differently. Tiago's generation has different methods. Sometimes I'm not sure if that makes us smarter or softer. Richer, Tiago interjected calmly. Your import operations have grown 40% since we established the cooperation framework. The Petrov's distribution network has expanded into 3 new territories. Everyone's profits are up and nobody's been hurt. I'd call that smart, not soft. What followed was a dinner that blurred every line I'd tried to maintain. The food was extraordinary, course after course of pasta and seafood and vegetables prepared with obvious care. The wine flowed freely, and the conversation ranged from business to family, to Leonardo's aspirations, to expand his father's operations into legitimate high-end fashion imports. Isabella asked about my journalism, genuinely interested in the stories I'd covered before investigating Tiago. Leonardo wanted to know if I thought the article would be positive or critical. Marco shared stories about his grandfather's journey from Sicily, the hardships and triumphs that had built the family's foundation. Through it all, I was hyper-aware of Tiago beside me. The way his knee occasionally brushed mine under the table. How he'd refill my wineglass without asking, somehow knowing exactly when I needed it. The soft laugh he gave when Isabella teased him about still being unmarried at 31. You work too much, Isabella scolded gently. Just like Marco did at your age. You need someone to remind you there's more to life than business. Perhaps I'm waiting for someone worth disrupting my schedule for, Tiago replied, and his gaze flickered to me so briefly I might have imagined it. By the time dessert arrived, I'd filled 3 pages in my mental notes, observations I'd transcribe later. But I'd also laughed more than I had in months, relaxed into conversations that had nothing to do with investigation and everything to do with simply being present. When Marco excused himself to take a phone call, Leonardo seized the opportunity to ask what I'd been wondering about all evening. "What's it really like?" he asked Tiago. "Managing all these families, preventing conflicts, building this system. My father talks about it like you're some kind of genius, but you're only 8 years older than me." Tiago considered the question carefully. "It's exhausting," he admitted. "Every negotiation is a performance where everyone has to leave feeling like they won something. Every conflict requires understanding not just what people want, but why they want it, and what they'd accept instead. It's constant problem-solving where the problems involve egos and territories and generations of grudges." "But you're good at it," I heard myself say. His eyes met mine. "I'm motivated. Violence is expensive and unpredictable. Peace is profitable. Once I convinced enough people that cooperation was in their financial interest, the system became self-sustaining." "He makes it sound simple," Marco said, returning to the table. "But what he's built required vision most of us lacked. My father would never have imagined working with the Petrovs. Tiago saw possibilities where we only saw threats." The pride in Marco's voice was unmistakable. This wasn't fear or obligation speaking. It was genuine respect. After dinner, Tiago insisted on walking me to the car rather than having the driver come to the restaurant entrance. The night air was cool, carrying the scent of Italian cooking and autumn leaves. We walked in silence for a block, the sounds of the restaurant fading behind us. "Thank you for tonight," I said finally. That was more enlightening than any formal interview could have been. "You saw how the families actually relate to each other when business is set aside." He slowed his pace, clearly in no hurry to reach the waiting car. "Isabella has known me since I was Leonardo's age. Marco trusts me with his family's future. That trust wasn't bought with threats or intimidation. How was it earned?" He stopped walking, turning to face me under a streetlight. "By proving repeatedly that I keep my word. By delivering results that benefit everyone. By showing that my success depends on their success." We stood there on the sidewalk, and I was struck by how normal this felt. How easy it would be to forget this was research, investigation, professional observation. How much I wanted to close the distance between us and see if his lips tasted like the wine we'd been drinking. Serafina. My name was soft on his lips. "I should tell you something." My heart hammered. "What?" "This arrangement, these 3 months of access, it's not just about satisfying your journalistic curiosity." His hand came up, fingers brushing my cheek with devastating gentleness. "I'm attracted to you. Have been since that night at the gala when you looked at me like I was a puzzle rather than a threat. That hasn't changed, and spending time with you is only making it stronger." The honesty stole my breath. I should have stepped back, should have reinforced professional boundaries, should have done anything except lean into his touch. "This is a terrible idea," I whispered. "Probably." His thumb traced my cheekbone. "But I promised you the truth. This is part of it. I'm supposed to be investigating you. And you are. Brilliantly." He smiled slightly. "But that doesn't make this any less real. I knew I should shut this down, should maintain objectivity, should remember every journalism ethics lecture I'd ever sat through. Instead, I asked, what are you proposing? Nothing that compromises your integrity. Continue your research, write your story, ask whatever questions you need answered." His hand dropped, but his gaze remained fixed on mine. "But also acknowledge that something's happening between us." Don't pretend you don't feel it too. I don't know what I feel, I admitted. You're complicated. Tiago. Everything about you contradicts itself. You profit from businesses you know are partially criminal, but you prevent violence. You've built an empire, but you use it to create stability. You should be exactly the villain I expected to find, but instead you're... What? He prompted when I trailed off. Someone I'm having trouble seeing clearly anymore, I finished. Which terrifies me. Good. His smile widened. I'd hate to be the only one off balance here. The car waited at the curb. I should have gotten in, should have ended this conversation before it became something I couldn't walk back from. Instead, I stood there searching his face for answers to questions I wasn't brave enough to ask aloud. The 3 months continues as agreed, I said finally. You give me access, I observe and research, and form my own conclusions. But this, whatever this is between us, we acknowledge it without letting it interfere with the truth. And if the truth is that we're both falling into something neither of us planned for, the question hung between us, dangerous and thrilling. Then I'll deal with that when I have to. He opened the car door for me, ever the gentleman despite everything. But before I could slide into the back seat, he caught my hand. Serafina. He waited until I looked at him. For what it's worth, I've never let anyone this close to my organization. The fact that I'm allowing you full access, that I'm showing you how everything actually works, that should tell you something about how much I trust you, how much you've already affected me. I pulled my hand free gently, needing the distance to think clearly. I'll see you Friday. You mentioned a meeting with your legitimate real estate holdings. 2 o'clock. I'll text you the address. He stepped back, letting me leave. Sleep well, Serafina. As the car pulled away, I watched him through the rear window. He stood under the streetlight watching the car disappear, hands in his pockets, expression unreadable. A man who'd built an empire on reading people and situations perfectly, now apparently as off balance as I felt. I pulled out my phone and started typing notes from the evening. Isabella's warmth, Marco's respect, Leonardo's admiration. The way the Castellano family clearly viewed Tiago not as a threat, but as a trusted partner. Evidence that contradicted every assumption about how organized crime families operated. But I also noted the electricity that had sparked between us on that sidewalk. The admission of attraction that I couldn't unhear. The terrifying realization that I'd stopped seeing Tiago as just a subject to investigate and started seeing him as a man I wanted to understand in ways that had nothing to do with journalism. My editor's voice echoed in my head. Never get personally involved with a source. It compromises everything. Too late, I thought, staring at my reflection in the car window. Way too late. The next 6 weeks blurred into a pattern that felt both exhilarating and terrifying. I embedded myself in Tiago's world with a thoroughness that my journalism professors would have applauded if they'd known about it. I observed meetings, interviewed his associates, reviewed financial records for his legitimate holdings, and gradually pieced together a picture that was far more complex than I'd anticipated. Tiago's empire operated on multiple levels. At the top were completely legitimate businesses, real estate developments, import companies, restaurants, a private security firm. Beneath that were businesses that existed in gray areas, operating legally, but serving clients whose own operations weren't entirely clean. And at the foundation were the families like the Castellanos and Petrovs, who paid Tiago percentages for access to resources, connections, and most importantly, his conflict resolution services. He'd created a system where violence was financially disadvantageous. Families who cooperated prospered. Those who chose conflict found themselves isolated, their access to Tiago's network cut off, their operations suddenly encountering difficulties that cooperation would have prevented. It was brilliant and ruthless in its efficiency, control through economic incentive rather than intimidation. But it was also more ethical than traditional organized crime. People weren't dying. Businesses were prospering. The neighborhoods where Tiago's influence extended had seen drops in violence and increases in economic development. I was writing a story that would challenge every assumption about how organized crime operated in modern cities, and I was falling for the man at the center of it. It happened gradually, then all at once. The way Tiago explained his philosophy during late-night conversations in his office, his voice passionate about creating systems that worked. How he remembered details about my life, asking about articles I was working on, the coffee order I preferred, my grandmother's health. The night he'd rescheduled an important meeting because I'd mentioned wanting to observe a specific negotiation. And the touches. Always respectful, never crossing clear lines, but increasingly frequent. His hand at my back, guiding me through crowds, fingers brushing mine when passing documents. The way he'd lean close to point out something in a contract, his proximity making my skin tingle with awareness. We hadn't kissed since that moment on the sidewalk 6 weeks ago when he'd admitted his attraction. But the tension between us had built with each passing day, electric and undeniable. It came to a head on a Friday evening in his office. I'd been reviewing financial statements for his real estate holdings, verifying that the profits matched his claims about legitimate operations. Everything checked out, which was somehow more surprising than finding discrepancies would have been. Satisfied? Tiago asked from his position by the window, where he'd been on a phone call in rapid Italian for the last 20 minutes. Your books are cleaner than I expected, I admitted, closing the laptop. Either you're exceptionally good at hiding illegal income, or you're actually running legitimate businesses that happen to have questionable clients. The latter. He crossed to the bar cart, pouring 2 glasses of whiskey without asking if I wanted one. I'd learned over the past weeks that he was remarkably observant about such things. My grandfather built this organization on violence and fear. My father maintained it through intimidation. I'm rebuilding it on economic incentive and mutual benefit. The families pay me because cooperation is profitable, not because they're terrified of what I'll do if they don't. He handed me a glass, then leaned against his desk, close enough to touch. Does that fit into your article? I don't know what my article is anymore, I confessed. The whiskey burned pleasantly on its way down. I came here expecting to expose a criminal enterprise. Instead, I'm finding an incredibly sophisticated business operation that exists in moral gray areas but isn't what anyone thinks it is. Is that disappointing? It's complicated. I met his gaze. You're complicated, Tiago. Every time I think I understand you, I discover another layer. And that bothers you. It fascinates me, I corrected, which is the problem. He set down his glass deliberately. Serafina, we've been dancing around this for 6 weeks. I think it's time we acknowledged what's actually happening here. My pulse jumped. What's happening here is research, journalism, professional observation. Liar. The word was soft, but unmistakable. You feel this too. The attraction, the connection, whatever you want to call it. You've felt it since that night at the gala, and it's only gotten stronger. I should have denied it. Should have maintained professional distance. Should have done anything except set down my own glass and close the space between us. This is a terrible idea, I said, for the second time since meeting him. You keep saying that. His hand came up to cup my face. Yet here you are. Here I am, I agreed. Then, before I could change my mind, before logic could reassert itself, I rose on my toes and kissed him. For one breathless moment, he went absolutely still. Then his arms came around me, pulling me close as he deepened the kiss with an intensity that made my knees weak. This wasn't gentle or tentative. This was weeks of restrained want finally unleashed, his mouth claiming mine with fierce possession. I gripped his shirt, feeling the solid warmth of him beneath the fabric, tasting whiskey and something uniquely him. His hand slid into my hair, tilting my head to change the angle, and I made a sound that should have embarrassed me but only seemed to encourage him. When we finally broke apart, both breathing hard. His forehead rested against mine. We probably shouldn't have done that. Definitely shouldn't have, I agreed, even as my hands remained fisted in his shirt. Your professional objectivity is compromised. Completely destroyed. You'll need to disclose this in your article. Assuming I can still write it. I pulled back enough to see his face. Tiago, I don't know how to do this. I don't know how to be objective about you anymore. Then don't be objective. His thumb traced my kiss-swollen lips. Be honest. Write about what you've actually discovered, not what you expected to find. Include the complications, the moral gray areas, the fact that I'm not a simple villain or hero. And include that I'm involved with you? If you want to maintain journalistic integrity, yes. He released me, stepping back to restore distance even though it clearly cost him. I won't compromise your ethics, Serafina. If you need to step away, to end this arrangement and write whatever story you need to write, I'll respect that. I stared at him. This man who'd given me unprecedented access to his organization, who'd been honest about his operations even when it might damage him, who was now offering to let me walk away despite the attraction burning between us. What if I don't want to walk away? The question escaped before I could stop it. Then we figure out how to navigate this together. He moved to the window, putting physical distance between us like he needed it to think clearly. But you should know what you're getting into. My world isn't safe or simple. There are people who'd use you to get to me. Enemies who'd see our relationship as a vulnerability to exploit. Like your mother tried with Victoria and Salvatore. He'd told me about that situation during one of our late-night conversations. The attempted blackmail, how it had been resolved, the family wounds that might never fully heal. Exactly like that, he confirmed. Dating me means becoming a target. It means security details and careful public appearances and constant awareness of threats. That's quite a sales pitch. I tried for humor to cut the tension. His expression remained serious. I need you to understand what you'd be choosing. I won't have you hurt because of me. I crossed to stand beside him at the window, looking out at the city lights below. Tiago, I've spent 6 weeks investigating you. I've seen how you operate, talked to dozens of people in your organization, reviewed every aspect of your business. I know exactly who you are, what you've built, and the risks involved. I turned to face him. I'm choosing this anyway, with full awareness of the complications. You're sure? Instead of answering with words, I kissed him again. Softer this time, a promise rather than an explosion of restrained desire. His arms came around me, holding me close, and for a moment, we simply stood there in his office overlooking the city he'd built his empire in, acknowledging what we'd both been feeling but hadn't admitted. When my phone buzzed with a text from my editor, reality reasserted itself. I pulled away reluctantly, checking the message. Need update on Montero's story. Publisher asking questions. I stared at the text, the weight of professional obligation crashing back down. I'd been given 6 months to deliver an exposé. 3 months remained, and instead of gathering evidence of criminal activity, I'd fallen for my subject and discovered a story far more nuanced than anyone expected. What does it say? Tiago asked. I showed him the message. He read it without expression, then handed back my phone. What will you tell them? The truth. I took a breath, making the decision even as I spoke. That I need more time because the story is more complicated than anticipated. That what I'm finding doesn't fit into a simple exposé format. Will they accept that? They'll have to. I looked up at him. Because I'm not publishing anything until I'm certain it's accurate and complete, even if that means pushing deadlines and dealing with an angry editor. His smile was slow and genuine. That's why I trust you. Your integrity won't bend even when it would be convenient, says the man who's completely destroyed my objectivity. I prefer to think I've given you a different perspective. He pulled me close again, unable to resist the contact. Besides, objective journalism is overrated. Honest journalism is better. We spent the rest of that evening in his office, talking about how to navigate this new dynamic. We established boundaries. I'd continue my research with full access as promised, but I'd also disclose our relationship in any article I published. He'd be honest about his operations, but would also protect me from the more dangerous aspects of his world. It was an imperfect solution to an impossible situation. But, as I left his office that night, his kiss still warming my lips, I felt something I hadn't in years. Certainty that I was exactly where I was supposed to be, despite how complicated it had become. My phone buzzed again. This time it was Tiago. Thank you for choosing this, for choosing me. Sleep well, Serafina. I smiled at the message, then typed back. Thank you for being worth the complication. See you Monday. As I rode the subway home, I pulled out my notebook and started writing. Not the expose I'd been planning, but something more honest. A story about a man who'd reimagined what power could mean, who'd built an empire on cooperation rather than violence, whose complexity defied simple categorization. A story I was now part of, rather than simply reporting. The realization should have terrified me. Instead, it felt like finally seeing clearly after months of looking through fog. 3 weeks after that kiss in his office, I made a catastrophic mistake. My editor had been pushing harder for something publishable, anything that would justify the months I'd spent on the Montero story. The publisher was questioning the investment, suggesting maybe I was too close to the subject, hinting that perhaps another journalist should take over. Panic made me reckless. I wrote a preliminary article focusing on Tiago's conflict resolution methods, how he'd reimagined organized crime through economic incentives. It was factually accurate, carefully sourced, and I'd thought, balanced. I framed him as a complex figure operating in moral gray areas, rather than a straightforward criminal. I sent it to my editor without showing it to Tiago first, without giving him a chance to review what I'd written, without considering how the families he worked with might react to seeing their operations discussed in the Metropolitan Post, even in carefully neutral language. The article published on a Wednesday morning. By Wednesday afternoon, my phone was exploding with calls from Tiago, from his sister Gabriella, from numbers I didn't recognize. I'd turned it off after the first dozen, guilt and dread churning in my stomach. I'd broken his trust. More than that, I'd potentially endangered the careful system he'd built. Thursday morning, I finally forced myself to go to his office. The receptionist's warm greeting was gone, replaced by cold professionalism. Mr. Montero is in a meeting. He's not available. Tell him I'm here. Tell him I need to explain. He said you weren't to be admitted. Her voice was carefully neutral. I'm sorry, Miss Blake. I waited in the lobby for 3 hours. When Tiago finally emerged with Marco Castellano and 2 other men I recognized from various meetings, his expression was carved from ice. He looked through me as if I didn't exist, continuing his conversation in Italian as they passed. Tiago, please. I stood, following them toward the elevator. Let me explain. He turned then, and the look in his eyes was colder than anything I'd ever seen from him. Explain what? That you published details about my operations without clearing it first. That you've potentially compromised relationships it took me years to build. That you violated every agreement we made about transparency. Marco's hand on his arm was restraining. Not here, Tiago. She's right, though. I owe her a conversation. His voice was flat. My office. 5 minutes, Serafina. That's all you get. Those 5 minutes were the worst of my life. I tried to explain about the pressure from my editor, about my panic that the story would be taken away from me, about how I'd thought the article was careful and balanced. You thought wrong. He stood behind his desk like it was a barrier between us. 3 families have already called questioning whether they can trust me to keep their operations private. The Petrovs are reconsidering the agreement we just finalized because they're concerned about media exposure. Marco is dealing with questions from his father about why their business practices are now public knowledge. I didn't reveal anything illegal. I was careful about sources, about specifics. You revealed that they work with me, that my organization exists as more than legitimate businesses. You connected dots that some people didn't want connected. His jaw was tight. And you did it without warning me, without giving me a chance to prepare or manage the fallout. I'm sorry. The words felt desperately inadequate. Tiago, I'm so sorry. I panicked. I should have shown it to you first, should have given you time to review and respond. Yes, you should have. He finally looked at me directly. We had an agreement, Serafina. Full access in exchange for transparency about what you'd publish. You violated that agreement. More than that, you violated my trust. The word trust landed like a physical blow. I know I did, and I don't have an excuse, just an explanation that doesn't make it better. He was silent for a long moment, his hands flat on the desk, like he was physically restraining himself. I need you to leave. I need to focus on damage control, on reassuring the families that this won't happen again, that their operations are secure. Can we talk about this? Really talk? Not just 5 minutes? Not now. Maybe not for a while. His expression was carefully controlled. I'm not sure I can look at you right now without being angry, and I don't want to say things I can't take back. I wanted to argue, to push, to make him understand. But the set of his jaw and the ice in his eyes told me that pushing now would only make things worse. I'll fix this, I said instead. Whatever it takes, I'll fix this. You can't unpublish an article, Serafina. The damage is done. I left his office with tears burning behind my eyes, holding them back through sheer force of will until I made it to the street. Then I stood on the sidewalk and let myself break, just for a moment, before pulling myself together and figuring out my next move. Over the following days, I tried everything. I called Tiago repeatedly, each call going to voicemail. I emailed explanations and apologies, all marked as read but never answered. I showed up at his office twice more, turned away by security both times. I published a follow-up article clarifying details, emphasizing the legitimate aspects of Tiago's operations, walking back some of the implications from the first piece. My editor was furious about the mixed messaging. Readers were confused, and Tiago still wouldn't talk to me. 2 weeks after the article published, Gabriella called. Meet me at the coffee shop near your apartment. Tomorrow morning, 9 a.m. She was already there when I arrived, sitting at a corner table with 2 cups of coffee. Her expression was less hostile than her brother's had been, but not exactly friendly. Thank you for meeting me, I said, sliding into the seat across from her. I'm not here for you. I'm here for Tiago. She pushed 1 coffee toward me. He's miserable. Won't admit it, of course, but I know my brother. He's been working 18-hour days trying to rebuild trust with the families, barely sleeping, not eating properly, completely shut down emotionally. I know I hurt him. I'm trying to fix it, but he won't talk to me. Because you broke something fundamental. Gabriella's voice was hard. My brother doesn't trust easily, Serafina. Our father taught him that trust is a weakness, that people will always betray you if the price is right. Tiago spent his entire life proving that wrong, building an organization based on mutual trust and benefit. And then you, the person he'd let closer than anyone in years, proved our father right. The words cut deeper than any of Tiago's cold anger. I didn't mean to. Intent doesn't matter. Impact does. She leaned back. But here's the thing. Despite everything, he's still in love with you. He won't say it, Probably won't even admit it to himself. But I've watched him fall for you over the past 3 months. Watched him become someone softer, more open, more willing to be vulnerable. My throat tightened. Then why won't he let me apologize properly? Because he's terrified. Gabriella's expression softened slightly. Terrified of trusting you again and having you hurt him worse. Terrified of admitting how much you matter. Our family, we don't do vulnerability well. We handle betrayal through distance and control. So what do? Prove you're worth the risk. She stood, not through words or apologies, through action. Show him that you understand what you broke and why it matters. Show him that your relationship is more important than your career ambitions. After she left, I sat in that coffee shop for another hour, drinking cold coffee and thinking. Gabriella was right. Words wouldn't fix this. I needed action, needed to demonstrate through choices rather than explanations that Tiago mattered more than professional advancement. I pulled out my phone and called my editor. I'm withdrawing from the Montero story, effective immediately. What? Serafina, you can't just... I'm too close to the subject. You were right about that. My judgment is compromised, and continuing to report on his organization would be unethical. I took a breath. I'll finish out my current assignments, but I want reassignment to different beats. This is career suicide. Maybe. I thought about Tiago's face when he'd told me to leave, about the pain beneath his anger. But it's the right thing to do. I spent the next week working on other stories, giving Tiago space while demonstrating through absence that I respected his boundaries. I didn't call, didn't show up at his office, didn't push. Just let him know through his sister that I'd withdrawn from covering his organization, and why. On the 8th day, my doorbell rang at 10 p.m. I opened it to find Tiago standing in my hallway, looking exhausted and uncertain in a way I'd never seen from him. You withdrew from the story, he said without preamble. I did. Gabriella said you told your editor you were too close to the subject, that continuing to report on me would be unethical. That's correct. He leaned against the doorframe. You're sacrificing your career. I'm prioritizing what matters. I met his gaze. The story, my career ambitions, none of it is worth losing you. I'm sorry it took me this long to realize that. I'm sorry I had to hurt you before I understood what I was risking. For a long moment, he simply looked at me. Then, can I come in? I stepped aside, letting him enter my small apartment. He looked around, taking in the space I'd never invited him to before, the mix of books and plants and comfortable chaos that was so different from his precisely ordered penthouse. I'm still angry, he said finally. What you did. Publishing without warning me. It activated every fear I have about trusting people. I know, but I also miss you. The admission seemed to cost him. These 2 weeks without you have been miserable. I've tried to convince myself I was better off, that the betrayal proved you weren't worth the risk. But Gabriella's right. I'm in love with you, and pushing you away isn't actually protecting me. It's just making me lonely. My breath caught. You love me? Unfortunately, yes. A ghost of his usual humor flickered across his features. Very inconvenient timing, given recent events. I crossed to him, stopping close enough to touch. I love you too. Which is why I withdrew from the story. Why I'm willing to rebuild trust however long it takes. Why I'll spend the rest of my career writing about literally anything else if that's what you need. His hand came up, cupping my face. I don't need you to abandon journalism. I need you to include me in decisions that affect me. I need transparency, Serafina. Not perfection, just honesty. I can do that. I leaned into his touch. I will do that. I swear. He kissed me then, softer than I expected given the circumstances. When we broke apart, his forehead rested against mine. This won't be easy. Rebuilding trust after it's been broken takes time. I have time, I promised. However long you need. And your career? We'll survive. There are other stories to tell, other investigations to pursue. None of them matter as much as this, as us. He pulled me close, his arms tight around me. We stood there in my small living room, holding each other, beginning the slow work of repair. It wasn't perfect. It wasn't even fully healed. But it was honest, and for Tiago, honesty mattered more than anything. The year that followed was the hardest and most rewarding of my life. Rebuilding trust didn't happen in grand gestures or dramatic moments. It happened in small choices made consistently over time. I showed Tiago every story I was working on, even ones that had nothing to do with him. I included him in professional decisions, asked his opinion on ethical dilemmas, demonstrated through daily actions that his input mattered. He, in turn, worked on letting me back in. It wasn't easy for him. Years of operating behind careful walls didn't dissolve overnight. But gradually, the distance between us closed. Late-night conversations resumed. Dinners together became regular rather than occasional. He started calling me during the day just to talk, to share something amusing that happened, to hear my voice. 6 months after the article crisis, we had our first major fight. Not about trust or journalism, but about something far more mundane. His tendency to work 18-hour days and my frustration with never seeing him. "You can't complain about my schedule," he'd said, voice tight with exhaustion and irritation. "You knew what my life was like when we started this." "I'm not complaining about your work. I'm complaining about you not taking care of yourself." I'd been equally frustrated. "You haven't had a full day off in 3 months. You barely sleep. This isn't sustainable." "Tiago, it's necessary. It's self-destructive, and you know it." The argument escalated, both of us too tired and stubborn to back down. I ended up leaving his penthouse at midnight, angry and hurt. We didn't speak for 2 days, both of us too proud to reach out first. Gabriella, bless her meddling heart, intervened. She called us both, separately, and told us we were being idiots. "You're fighting because you care about each other. Figure out how to communicate about that without destroying what you've rebuilt." The makeup was as intense as the fight. Tiago showed up at my apartment with apologies and promises to set better boundaries between work and personal life. I admitted I'd been pushing too hard, expecting him to change fundamental parts of himself overnight. We talked until dawn, working through not just that fight, but the patterns that had caused it. "I'm not good at this," he'd admitted as the sun rose. "At being vulnerable, at letting someone care for me, at accepting that my well-being matters to someone else." "Then let me teach you." I'd laced my fingers through his. "And I'll learn to trust that you know your own limits, that you won't work yourself to death just because I'm worried." Those conversations, the hard ones where we confronted our patterns and fears, became the foundation of something stronger than what we'd had before. We learned each other's warning signs. I recognized when he was retreating behind work to avoid processing emotions. He identified when my silence meant I was overthinking rather than actually calm. A year after the article published, Tiago took me back to the place where everything started, the Grand Rothwell's ballroom, hosting the same Children's Foundation benefit auction. "Why are we here?" I asked as we entered, my hand in his. The space looked exactly as it had that night 13 months ago, elegant and filled with Manhattan's elite. "Because this is where I first saw you." He guided me toward the same windows where we'd stood that night, where you looked at me like I was worth understanding rather than fearing, where everything changed. He pulled out a small velvet box, and my breath caught. "Tiago, before you panic," he said, echoing words from months ago. "This isn't a proposal." "Not exactly." He opened the box to reveal a ring. Simple, elegant, a single diamond that caught the light. "This is a promise. That I choose you, every day, despite complications. That I trust you with my heart, even though that terrifies me. That I want to spend my life with you, whenever you're ready for that step. Tears blurred my vision. That's the most romantic non-proposal I've ever heard. I'm working on my emotional honesty. His smile was soft. Is it working? It's perfect. I looked at the ring, then at him. And yes. Yes to what? I haven't technically asked anything yet. Yes to the promise. Yes to choosing each other. Yes to someday, when we're both ready. I held out my hand. Yes to all of it, Tiago. He slid the ring onto my finger, then pulled me close and kissed me, while around us the gala continued, people pretending not to notice even as they absolutely noticed. When we broke apart, I could see Gabriella across the room giving us a thumbs up. I love you, he said against my hair. Even when you're impossible. Even when we fight. Even when you make me confront parts of myself I'd rather ignore. I love you too. I leaned back to look at him. Even when you work too much. Even when you're emotionally constipated. Even when you make me want to strangle you and kiss you in equal measure. His laugh rumbled through his chest. We're quite a pair, the best kind, I agreed. Over the next year, we continued building our life together. I transferred to investigative work focused on city corruption rather than organized crime, finding purpose in exposing the legitimate abuses of power rather than the gray areas Tiago operated in. My career recovered from my withdrawal from his story, and I built a reputation for ethical reporting that held people accountable without destroying lives unnecessarily. Tiago continued transforming his organization. The families he worked with prospered under his conflict resolution framework. Violence in the territories he influenced remained low. His legitimate businesses expanded. And slowly, carefully, he created something that could potentially outlast him. A system based on cooperation that didn't require his constant management. I want our children to inherit something they can be proud of, he told me one evening as we sat in his penthouse. Our penthouse now, since I'd officially moved in 6 months earlier. Not a criminal empire they have to apologize for, but businesses and systems that actually help people. Our children? I raised an eyebrow. That's quite an assumption. Is it? He pulled me closer. We've been together for over 2 years now. We live together. We've survived betrayal and rebuilding and approximately 47 major arguments. I think discussing hypothetical future children is reasonable. When you put it that way. I smiled. How many hypothetical children are we discussing? 2. Maybe 3 if you're feeling ambitious. His hand splayed across my stomach. I want them to have what I didn't. Stability. Parents who choose each other consistently. A legacy they can actually inherit without moral compromise. 2 years and 3 months after that night at the gala, Tiago proposed properly. Not at another auction or in his office or anywhere public. In our living room, on a random Tuesday, while I was grading fact-checking assignments for the journalism class I'd started teaching part-time. Marry me, he said. Not a question, but a statement of intent. I looked up from my papers. Is this because I corrected your grammar earlier? Because I stand by that assessment. You absolutely misused a semicolon. This is because I love you, and I'm tired of calling you my girlfriend, when what I mean is my partner, my equal, my choice every single day. He knelt beside my chair. Marry me, Serafina. Let me spend the rest of my life choosing you. You already asked me to marry you. At the gala, remember? I said yes. That was a promise. This is a proposal. He was smiling now. There's a difference. Explain it. A promise is hypothetical. A proposal requires actually planning a wedding and making it real. I set aside my papers, giving him my full attention. And you want to make it real? More than I've wanted anything except you in the first place. Then yes. I framed his face with my hands. Yes, I'll marry you, Yes, I'll keep choosing you. Yes to all of it. We married 6 months later in a small ceremony attended by close friends and family. Gabriella stood as my maid of honor, having become not just Tiago's sister, but my genuine friend. Marco Castellano attended with his family, proud as if he were watching his own son wed. My former editor came, still slightly bewildered by how my career had evolved, but supportive nonetheless. Tiago's vows were characteristically honest. I promised to work on my emotional communication, to not retreat behind work when things get difficult, to trust you with my vulnerabilities even when that terrifies me, to choose us over everything else, every single day. Mine were equally direct. I promise to include you in decisions that affect you, to respect the boundaries we've built, to call you out when you're being impossible while also supporting your vision, to keep choosing this complicated, beautiful life we're building together. You may kiss your bride, the officiant said, and Tiago did, thoroughly and with complete disregard for our audience. At the reception, I found myself talking to Leonardo Castellano, now running legitimate import operations for his family and thriving. You changed everything, he said, gesturing around at the gathered families, all peacefully celebrating together. Before you, Tiago was brilliant, but isolated. Afterwards, he opened up, let people in, built something even stronger, because he wasn't operating alone anymore. I think we changed each other, I corrected, watching my husband across the room negotiating with Gabriella about something, both of them laughing. I learned that truth is complicated. He learned that trust is possible. However you frame it, we're all better for it. Leonardo raised his glass. To complicated truths and impossible trust. I'll drink to that. Later, as we danced under the stars, Tiago pulled me close. Thank you. For what? For not giving up, for choosing to rebuild rather than walk away, for seeing me clearly and deciding I was worth the complications. Thank you, I countered, for trusting me again after I broke that trust, for letting me prove that I could be better, for building this life with me. He kissed me softly. We did good, didn't we? We did great, I agreed, looking around at the celebration, at the families who'd found peace through his vision, at the future we were building together. Against all odds and despite every complication, we did great. 3 years after we married, I published a book. Not an exposé, but an in-depth examination of how modern conflict resolution could reshape community safety. I used Tiago's methods as a case study, with his full cooperation and review of every chapter. The book won awards for ethical journalism and sparked conversations about alternative approaches to crime reduction. Tiago read the dedication aloud the night we got our first copy. To my husband, who taught me that the most important truth is honesty with the people you love. That's better than your first article about me, he teased. Everything's better than that article. I winced at the memory, though I learned from it. We both did. He set the book aside and pulled me into his lap. We learned that trust is fragile but worth protecting. That love requires constant choice. That the complicated path is often the right one. When did you become so philosophical? I married a journalist. It was inevitable that some of your analytical thinking would rub off. I kissed him, tasting laughter and love, and the life we'd built from curiosity and compromise and consistent choice. Outside our windows, the city spread below, holding millions of stories. But none of them mattered as much as ours. From a list of crossed-out names, to a love neither of us had planned for. From investigation to involvement. From broken trust to rebuilt stronger. From two people circling each other warily to partners choosing each other daily. It was complicated and beautiful, and exactly what we both needed, even before we knew to look for it. Sometimes the most powerful love stories begin with curiosity, rather than certainty. Serafina and Tiago's journey from investigation to devotion reminds us that real connection requires both vulnerability and trust, and that the most worthwhile relationships are built through choosing each other, even after mistakes. Their story proves it's never too late to rebuild what matters most. If this story touched your heart, click like to show your support. What would you have done in Serafina's position? Pursued the story or protected the relationship? Share your thoughts in the comments below.